Okay, maybe we should wait for another minute. Because there are still people joining. Okay, probably we should get started and probably more people will join in the process. Good afternoon, everyone, and very warm welcome to the Survey Futures Survey Practice Workshop on Accessibility and Inclusivity in Self-Completion Surveys. I'm Olga Maslovska, and I'm a professor of survey research and social statistics at the University of Southampton. I'm also Deputy Director of Survey Futures, and I will talk at the beginning of this presentation. I will say a couple of words about Survey Futures. Can you see the slides now? Yeah? Are they in the correct format as well? No, they're not. Apologies. Let me try to change this. Oh, how do you do it? I don't know. In the past, it used to be a button where it would just display setting. I think this is the one. Yes. So hopefully it is correct now. Is that correct now? Okay. Okay, apologies about this. So a couple of words about Survey Futures. Survey Futures is a multi-institutional research program focused on ensuring that high-quality surveys in the UK can innovate and adapt to a fast-changing survey data collection landscape. Our main overarching aim is to ensure that it will remain possible in the UK to carry out high-quality social surveys. Survey Futures is a collaboration between 9 universities and 3 major survey agencies in the UK, NatSen, Ipsos, and Varian. And we're working in partnership with the Office for National Statistics and the National Centre for Research Methods. So this research program includes over 50 researchers working across 9 different research strands, investigating the most significant topics of survey research. You can visit our website, and we're currently at a very exciting part of the Survey Futures program. We're getting closer to the end, and the project is finishing at the end of June. And we are currently at a very exciting point where there are lots of outputs are coming out weekly or sometimes even daily. And if you would like to see our publications and our different outputs, you can visit our website, or if you can join our mailing list, and if you haven't done it yet, and then you will be notified about each new output as soon as they become available. So now a couple of words about Research Strand 4. So the title of the Research Strand 4 is Methods for Surveys Without Field Interviewers. And within this research strand, we're working on 5 different sub-projects. The first one is focusing on recruitment, and we just had a webinar or workshop, which was, we were talking about our recruitment findings literally just now, 15 minutes ago. The second sub-project is focusing on accessibility and inclusivity for population subgroups. And today you will hear about our work, which comes out from this sub-project. We also have 3 additional sub-projects. We are working on targeted procedures, knock-to-notch approach, and also within household selection of individuals. Also on this slide, you can see the team membership. So this is a true and very exciting collaboration between 3 institutions: University of Essex, University of Southampton, and also City St. George's University of London. So within this research strand, we have already published a working paper, which is entitled A Framework for Identifying and Addressing the Risks of Exclusion from Social Surveys, which the working paper was produced by Professor Peter Lin, and it has already been published on the Survey Futures website. And currently, we're finalizing evidence review and also started working on survey practice guide. So for these two outputs, this is still work in progress. So today, we have two excellent presentations. In the first one, Peter will be talking about the framework and about the working paper, which I just mentioned. And then there will be a joint presentation by Anthantha and Christian, and they will be talking about our evidence review. I think I should stop sharing now, and over to you, Peter. Maybe, sorry, apologies, Peter. Just a couple of housekeeping items. First of all, we're recording this webinar. If somebody would like not to be recorded, please raise your hand. Okay, it seems that everything is okay. Also, after the second presentation, after each presentation, we'll have a couple of minutes to ask some clarification questions. And then after the second presentation, we'll have a questions and answers session as well. Thank you very much, Peter. Now over to you.
Thanks, Olga. So, as Olga said, I'm basically going to start by giving an introduction to the detailed work that's going to be presented subsequently. And the introduction is by way of a kind of framework, a way of thinking about these issues of exclusion from surveys. Now, my starting point, I guess, is that the title of the workshop includes the word inclusivity. And I just want to, if I can get my clicker to work, clarify what we mean by that in today's workshop. In a social survey context, there are at least three ways, I think, in which the word inclusivity is used. And I've taken these little definitions here from the forthcoming UN Handbook on Surveys on Individuals and Households, where the handbook talks about inclusive data collection, and inclusive statistics. So inclusive data is about making sure that your surveys capture information that is relevant and important, so inclusive in that sense. So, in the UK context, you might immediately think of things like ethnic group or biological sex or gender identification or whatever, making sure that you include those questions on your surveys so that we have data that is inclusive. The second thing is inclusive data collection, and this is about using data collection methods that are designed to be inclusive of all members of the population, so everybody can take part in the survey and provide their data. And then the third thing is then what you do with that survey data once you've collected it. So the idea is that you should publish inclusive statistics, inclusive analysis that recognizes these important dimensions. So just to be clear, what we're doing in this workshop this afternoon is talking about the second of those three things, inclusive data collection, ensuring that everybody can take part in surveys. Now, there are various organizations and other bodies, have principles and have made statements about inclusivity in surveys or in statistics or in some related dimension. So here's one from the UK Statistics Authority, which is talking about statistics in general, not just surveys, but includes surveys. And their quote is that everyone counts and is counted, and no one is left behind. So, and is counted means included in things like the census and surveys and other statistics that are produced. So the idea is everyone is counted. Now, that does not mean that we have to always carry out a census, that we can't use sampling. It doesn't mean that literally you have to count everyone, but it means that everyone has to have a chance of being counted, and all those people who should be counted have a good chance of actually being counted and data being collected from them. So that's kind of the context. Now, if we think about surveys, you think about the survey process, there are perhaps three main steps that are important. The first is that we define a population that we wish to study. We then select a sample to represent that population for our survey. We then try to collect data from the sample. So not everyone selected for the sample actually participates. Some of them are non-respondents. So we have three steps: defining the population, selecting the sample, and obtaining the response. And any one of those three steps, there are things that can happen that will cause certain subgroups to be at risk of exclusion. So I'm going to say a few words about each of those. So when we think about defining the population, many of our surveys, certainly most of our general population surveys in this country, aim to cover the household population. That means at any one moment in time, anyone who's not living in a household, so homeless people, people living in institutions and so on, are excluded. So those people are excluded from surveys by design. We never even attempt to include them, right? So that's step one that we should worry about. Step two is selecting the sample. Sometimes our sampling frames are imperfect. There may be certain groups of people who are not included in the sampling frame or who are underrepresented on the sampling frame, and therefore the sampling frame introduces undercoverage, which is potentially another form of exclusion. So for many general population surveys in the UK, we use the postcode address file as our sampling frame. This is a list of residential addresses to which the Royal Mail delivers mail. Some households live at addresses that are not on that list because they may be live at an address that's shared with a business, so it's a business address, so something like that. Or they live in some other less stable form of accommodation that simply isn't on the list, doesn't have its own address. So there are some people excluded for that reason. And for other types of surveys, there are other reasons why people may not be on the sampling frame. And then, as I said, the third step is participation. Even after we've selected our sample, even if we did have a definition of the population that was comprehensive and we did have a sampling frame that was comprehensive, we would still most likely have some sample members who don't participate, and non-response tends not to happen completely at random. It happens for reasons. Those reasons are correlated with characteristics of sample members, and therefore non-response is differential between subgroups and potentially leads to subgroups being underrepresented. So the first step of my framework, if you like, to think about exclusion is to think about these three steps and to think carefully about what we're doing at each of those three steps when we're designing and carrying out a survey. I wanted to say a little bit more than that. Those of you familiar with the total survey error framework as a way of thinking about all the sources of error that can potentially affect your survey estimates will have realized that it's the representation dimension of total survey error that we're talking about here, because what we care about at the end of the day is primarily whether our survey statistics, and therefore the survey sample upon which they are based, represent well the population that we're trying to represent. So here is the total survey error framework as presented by others. This comes from the Groves and Liburg paper, and I've simply highlighted in yellow those three steps that we had on the previous slide. These are the ones that can introduce an element of survey error into our estimates because we haven't fully accurately specified the population, because we don't have perfect coverage of the population with our sampling frame, and because there may be non-response error. So that's how it feeds in, and this is why, from a statistical point of view, inclusivity is important, because it affects our survey statistics. Now, that might not be the only reason we think it's important, and I'll come to that. So let's think about, after we've defined our target population, the next two steps: selecting the sample and then getting response from the sample. So when we select our sample, as I've said, we typically firstly define out the non-household population, but then we potentially have deficiencies in the sampling frame as well. Now, depending on the context of your survey, you might need to think carefully about how the sampling frame is constructed, what processes lead units to be on the frame or not on the frame, and what implications that might have for undercoverage. Frames are often lists that have been produced for completely different purposes. The postcode address file is produced in order to facilitate the delivery of mail, not in order to facilitate carrying out social surveys. And similarly, other surveys sample from other frames. So whatever process results in the production of that frame, you need to understand a bit about. And that will tell you something about, why, in what context entries might be out of date, what kinds of people might be missing from the frame, and whether it's worth augmenting your sampling strategy with some kind of supplementary strategy or supplementary frame of units that would otherwise be missing and therefore undercovered. Okay. Now, when we then go to the next step of getting response from our sample, non-response can primarily be thought of as falling into one of these three categories. We might fail to locate or make contact with the sample unit, so they never get to hear our invitation or read our invitation to take part in the survey. If they do get that far, then they may be either unwilling or unable to participate. So most of the reasons why people sometimes don't take part in our surveys, we can fairly unambiguously, at least in principle, put into one of those three categories. So I think that's just a useful way of thinking about things that can lead to non-response and consequently what it is that we might do about it in terms of survey design to try to minimize the risk of any of those three factors leading to exclusion or underrepresentation of important subgroups. So I'll just say a few words about each. So first of all, on the failure to locate or contact, obviously one reason why this happens is because the contact details on our sampling frame are incorrect. So if we're using a sampling frame that comes from some kind of administrative records where we have, let's say, people's name and address and we're mailing, in some cases, those details will be out of date. And they're more likely to be out of date for people who have less frequent interactions with the administrative system that is leading to administrative database. And obviously, other things being equal, people who change their contact details, their address, whatever, more frequently are more likely to have out-of-date details. But it's not just an artifact of the properties of the frame, it also depends what we as survey researchers do with that information, how we use it to try to locate and contact people. Now, in a way, this framework is a general framework for all surveys. So I've included one or two comments about face-to-face surveys in kind of pale grey for those of you who are interested. But what we're talking about today is self-completion surveys. So in the case of a self-completion survey where we are mailing something by post, inviting people to take part in a survey, whether that is online or on paper, some people will not receive those mailings because of the nature of the property that they live in, or they will receive it but not be aware of it, not open it, whatever. If somebody doesn't actually get as far as opening our mailing, then they are completely unaware that they are being invited to take part in the survey. So the other considerations about whether they're willing to and whether they're able to are just not relevant because we failed to get past this first step. So that's the first thing to bear in mind is we need to get people to receive and open our mailings. Assuming they get that far, second step is, are they able to participate? Even if they were willing, are they able to? And there are various barriers that affect different people to different extents in terms of how easy or difficult it is to take part in a survey. And we're particularly worried when we're talking about inclusivity about the extremes. So people for whom it would be extremely hard to take part in a survey unless we adapt it in some way. Okay, and the subsequent presentation is going to talk a bit more about what some of those things might be that we could do to adapt our surveys. So just to give you an idea, we're talking here about things like levels of literacy, shortcomings with vision, motor control, not being able to communicate in whatever language we send the questionnaire in, and so on. But we're also, in the case of web surveys, talking about access to online questionnaires, comfort and ability to interact with online questionnaires, and so on. And finally, the third category is people who may well have received our letter and may well be able to take part, but are unwilling to do so. And this is as important, I think, when you think about inclusivity, as the category of people who are unable to take part. Quantitatively, in many ways, it's far more important because there are far more people empirically who would be able to take part in a survey but don't, suggesting that they're unwilling to. Then there are people who are simply not capable of it. They may be less different in terms of survey characteristics. It depends what your survey is about, but that's another question. And there are many reasons why people might be less willing to take part in surveys. People have concerns about things like privacy, data usage, the legitimacy of the survey, and so on. They may just be unwilling to give you their time and information, and it might be a little bit less clear why that is. It's just a general tendency to be less willing to help, perhaps. And there are also lots of situational reasons. People may be unwilling to take part in your survey today, but much more willing to take part if you ask them next week. It just depends what mood they're in today, what their situation is today, and so on. Most of these things, possibly all of them, are not independent, however, of our survey design and our survey communications and what we tell people about our surveys. Unwillingness is much more likely to occur if the survey appears to be irrelevant or difficult or intrusive, or it's just poorly explained and we haven't really, motivated the respondent to want to take part. So there's a lot we can do to try to overcome some of these reasons why people may be unwilling to take part in surveys. Okay, so that's basically the framework of the stages in the survey process where exclusion may arise and the reasons why it may arise. The question is, to what extent does this matter? And which are the groups in the population that are at risk of exclusion if we don't try really hard to do something about it? Now, I'm not going to go into any detail. There's nothing empirical here about who other groups are excluded, but just thinking in principle about the different reasons that I've outlined, it's clearly likely to be the case that people with less stable lives, in some sense, are at greater risk of being excluded because their details will be out of date on the sampling frame, we'll be less able to contact them, and so on. Similarly, people who are less able to fill in questionnaires for whatever reasons, various disabilities, low literacy levels, poor internet skills, and so on. And also people with very busy lives, because they need to have the time and the willingness to take part in our surveys. Now, to some extent, what that does mean is that it tends to be the more needy, the more vulnerable in society who are at greater risk of exclusion from our surveys. For social surveys, that's important because those groups are very often the ones that we're particularly interested in, and ensuring that they are represented in our surveys is important. So, to conclude, what should we do about this? Well, in a way, this is the subject of the next presentation, so I'll leave it until then. But just again, by way of framework, just to point out that there are many different types of things that could be done, right? We could design our surveys better, and of course we always should, but some of the things that we could do are actually quite costly. We need to think carefully about whether it is cost effective to disproportionately use our resources to improve the likelihood of inclusion of certain subgroups. We have to get the balance right. Otherwise, we end up using all of our resources for very small subgroups and have nothing left for the survey as a whole. So we need to think about that. And to think about that, we need to have some idea of what effect the underrepresentation of various subgroups might have on our statistics, on our estimates, and on the knowledge base that we're interested in having. And weigh that up against the costs and the feasibility of making inclusion easier for those subgroups. So that's the statistical argument, right? What effect does exclusion have on the survey statistics, and what is the cost of improving that? Final point is that maybe statistical considerations are not the only ones. There are perhaps also ethical or moral implications. We often spend our time trying hard to persuade respondents to take part in our surveys because we feel that it's kind of, a shared good, a civic right, a civic, obligation that people should take part in our surveys. Well, if it's an obligation, then isn't it also a right that people should be able to take part in our surveys if they want to? And maybe we should try and make them as accessible to everyone as we possibly can. So that's the end of the introduction. And with that, oh, I'm so sorry. I forgot to move on my slides, didn't I? Apologies. Apologies. That was my last slide. And with that, I'm going to hand over.
Thank you very much, Peter. I was wondering, we have a couple of minutes for clarification questions, if there are any at this point. Okay, so if there are no questions at this point, I would like to hand over to Enfante and Christian for their presentation, and then we'll have time for questions after that as well. Thank you.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Christian Domarchi. I'm a research fellow at the University of Southampton, and along with Entlantla from the University of City St. George's University of London, we will be presenting the findings of our evidence review on inclusivity and accessibility practices in surveys, particularly in self-administered surveys. So thanks, Peter, for providing this very helpful introduction. So that saves me a couple of slides that I would have done otherwise. But basically, the motivation for doing
Christian,
this
apologies, you have a different, can you swap the screens, yeah? Because we're seeing...
The presenter view, oh yeah. What did you do for this?
I think at the top, there is something dual, I don't see it now because I'm not sharing my screen, dual something.
Display settings.
Ah, yeah, display settings. And then swap screens.
Yeah, I'm just going to hide the presenter view. That's fine. Did that work? Yeah?
No, not yet.
No?
Ah, yes, it works now. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry about that. Okay, so the motivation for this work is that we think social surveys should aim to represent a diverse range of experiences from different groups. This is, of course, important, as Peter was saying, from a statistical point of view, because failure to include certain populations of groups can introduce biases or limit how generalizable the findings of the survey are. From a policy perspective as well, we know that overlooking insights from underrepresented groups can lead to poorly informed or detrimental policies. So that's also another imperative that we need to include these groups. From an equality perspective, excluding marginalized or disadvantaged groups can reinforce and perpetuate inequalities. And from an ethical point of view, when individuals encounter barriers that exclude them from research, they are also being restricted, as we were discussing before, from exercising their rights in society in general. So there's a lot of reasons for which we should care about including and making our surveys more inclusive. Yeah, so there are, of course, many different definitions of inclusivity and accessibility in surveys. For our evidence review, we're using these two concepts. First, inclusivity refers to the full range of human diversity to be included and reflected in research, so involves enabling this. Considering and learning from people of all backgrounds and perspectives. On the other hand, we have accessibility, which is a component of inclusivity, and in general terms is defined as a state in which an individual's functional capacity and the functional demands of participation in an activity are matched. So in this case, the activity would be the completion of a survey. So the individual can effectively complete the activity, respond to the survey in this case. So we're talking about these two concepts. That there are other components of inclusivity, but we are focusing in accessibility, which is getting access to the actual survey and being able to participate fully in the survey completion task. Luckily for us, when we were writing the evidence review, we found a lot of documentation and a lot of work already being carried, which we would like to acknowledge because it has served as the main basis of the work we have been doing with this evidence review. Because inclusivity and accessibility are fundamental objectives of modern survey research, and their importance has been increasingly recognized across UK statistical and research landscape. So we have inclusivity was established as one of the 4 core principles in the 2020 to 2025 UK Statistics Authority strategy. Because of this, it also forms a cornerstone of the government social research strategy from 2021 to 2025. By the way, I'm providing links to this document, so when we upload these slides, this will be clickable, so you would get access to these documents as well. Partly as the work that it has been carried out for improving inclusivity and accessibility in social research. In 2021, the National Statistician convened an inclusive data task force to recommend measures for achieving a step change in the inclusivity of UK data and evidence. So we have also used some of the work and the recommendations they have been providing. Obviously, there's a lot of surveys use the respondent-centered design approach, which comes from the ONS surveys, but has been extended to other surveys as well. And this has one of the main focuses of this approach is inclusivity and trying to make surveys accessible to all types of users. And in 2024, the Government Analysis Function published official guidance on inclusivity in surveys to support best practice. So we have a lot of sources providing recommendations to about what surveys should do to be more inclusive and more accessible, and to include all these excluded population subgroups into social research. However, there are trade-offs in place because engaging population subgroups with barriers to participation in social surveys will likely involve costly measures, not all the time, but some of the measures that we will explore in the following slides can be costly, can be a bit expensive, and can be not as effective in terms of improving the survey representativeness or the estimates, the precision of the estimates. So we have to always be mindful of that. And well, Peter acknowledges this in the working paper that he was presenting before me, but also other documents such as the guidelines to make surveys on households and individuals more accessible by the United Nations. They also highlight that measures for improving survey accessibility and inclusivity should not only be practical with the external participants, basically making them accessible for respondents, but also should be practical from an internal resources perspective. So acknowledging time, staffing, budget constraints faced by survey agencies. So there's a balance to be made there, and this is what motivated us to do some research and to collect the evidence available for inclusivity and accessibility in social surveys. So basically in this document, which we are still producing, this hasn't been published yet, but it should be published soon on the Survey Futures website. What we do is reviewing inclusive survey practices documented in international academic literature and UK survey practice reports. So we use the same 2 sources that we used in our evidence review about recruitment, which we presented some time ago this afternoon. We also identify measures implemented in social surveys research to include population subgroups willing to participate but unable to do so. So this is the main focus of our evidence review. So it would be groups that would be willing to participate, but for some, due to any type of restriction in the or constraint in the survey data collection process, are unable to participate in that. And then we discuss whether these measures can be helpful for obtaining high quality data from representative samples, or whether they are effective measures, or whether there are more specific versions that maybe should be analyzed on a case-by-case basis. This is not moving. Okay, so we are focusing on these 7 groups. So the first 4 groups have disabilities and impairments, which can greatly damage their ability to participate in surveys. So Atlanta will be discussing those. We have blind and visually impaired respondents, deaf or hard of hearing, participants with motor control and dexterity impairments, and people with mental health and neurodevelopmental conditions. But there's other types of limitations that are not necessarily related to disabilities and impairments, which we will also be briefly exploring. So people with literacy and language limitations, for example. And then this very important group also, which are usually referred to as the digitally excluded groups, which also may have barriers for participation in survey research. So we will start with the first group, and I'm going to hand over to Ntlantla so that he can continue with the presentation.
Thank you, Christian. I am going to share my slides. Okay, can you see that?
Yes, all good, yeah.
Okay. Yes, the first group that I am going to talk about is those who are visually impaired or blind. Now, in all of this, when we are collecting data, we need to think about the population of those particular groups within the wider UK population. So in terms of prevalence, people who are blind or have are visually impaired in some capacity, approximately 2% of people of working age, so working age adults, and approximately 9% of those who are of state pension age have reported experiencing some visual impairment. Now, visual impairment then is associated with some other aspects in terms of reduced access to education for people, poor quality of life, plus also low participation in society, essentially. These factors also then contribute to how people are then excluded in other aspects like social surveys. However, people with who are blind and impaired, in terms of their functioning, it varies greatly. For some, there's in terms of severity, it can be related to age. It's also associated with other comorbidities, meaning actually that the support needs, the support that they need differs from within across individuals. Now, in terms of participating in surveys, some of the issues that have been highlighted in the literature about the challenges that people experience is that the traditional survey materials, whether this is paper or some adapted electronic formats, are often presented in forms that they can't access or they can't use due to their visual impairments. Now, people who are visually impaired and blind, they have ways of adapting or using adaptive technologies to be able to access and read these materials. So some of the methods that they use or means that they use would be screen readers. They can access reading material through braille displays, or they can have audio formats to access the information. However, these tools can still sometimes limit the ability to retain an overview of text, layout, and structure. If you think about it, if someone is reading using a screen reader, basically they can only go, or in Braille, they can only go through certain text at a time. They can't get the full overview of the text that they're reading. So this creates a problem when they're actually going through a survey. Now, one of the issues that we experienced conducting this review was that there is limited qualitative or quantitative research in these areas. So some of our of the information or our literature is based on qualitative research. The ONS has conducted some qualitative research looking into different groups, and those who are blind and visually impaired were one of those groups that they looked at. And some of those issues that they raised in terms of challenges with accessing the material were that accessibility to challenges with survey materials, so text to speech apps that people do use to support them read. They struggled with colored boxes that are presented in the letters, as well as the column layouts of some of the material. So this actually meant that if they're using a screen reader, that might not only be, they will only see, they can't read the whole line because the presentation of the paper or the questionnaire is split into two. So you only have half of the paper, and then the text is wrapped below, so it doesn't continue across the whole page, which then presents problems. So colored backgrounds, they reduce contrast when people are using magnifiers, so that creates a challenge for them. Participants in this qualitative study, they preferred to read black text on a white background, and also larger font was more helpful to them. Positive response to accessibility statements. So one of the things that they found positive was if they include the inclusion of an accessibility statement at the top of an invitation letter, meant actually they felt included because it displayed to participants that the organization or the survey agency thought about their needs, and they included a statement to make them aware that actually they did consider, and they're providing an alternative for them to be able to participate. This explained the alternatives, that formats that people could access. Now, within these groups, you also get people of different levels of familiarity with technology. So those that were those tech users in their daily lives, they preferred online modes of participating in surveys. And they tended to use screen readers or Zoom functions, and they actually valued the idea of them being independent and had a means that was convenient for them to participate. In contrast, people with who are low digital users found online competition stressful and discouraging. Now, in terms of measures that can be helpful for people who are blind or with visual impairment, they express that providing a clear overview and navigation support. For instance, if you begin the questionnaire with information on the length of the survey, so that they know how long the survey is, because they can only read a portion of it at a time. So the whole idea that they can't have an overview of the questionnaire, so they can only read a portion of it. So knowing how the length of the survey is might be helpful to them. Also using positive numbers for each question, so they know what that they're following through the order of the questions, and also including blank spaces between questionnaires as a way of separating the questions so that they know to move on to the next question. The other aspect is to optimize the question and answer formatting. So this involves reformatting the answer options so that it begins and ends with a distinct letter to make it easier for them to differentiate. So essentially, if someone is reading sort of Braille questionnaire, if there's no, for instance, if there's no space between questions, it might be difficult for them to know whether they've actually read through the whole question or they're still reading along the same line. So if you've got different lines, them having different letters in terms of at the start of the answer question, they know it's a different question, it's a different response altogether. Ensure questions and response options remain visually grouped. Also, another issue was, measure was to consider text characteristics and device compatibility. So fonts that are Arial was more recommended because there's more space between the letters in terms of how it's written. So you don't get, they wouldn't prefer font that is difficult to disentangle, whether it's a T or an I. So they need to have spaces between how the letter is formed. Consider offering reverse contrast, so white paper, white letters on a black page as an option. Design surveys to be compatible with smartphones and built-in accessibility features, as these are frequently used for reading devices. For instance, you want to be able to zoom the text, so you need devices that your survey needs to be designed in a way that is compatible with those features. Provide explicit format options and instructions. This includes having a clear guidance on the completion methods, whether people need to use a Braille typewriter to be able to respond. In some instances, of course, the Braille typewriter, a limitation with this is it takes, it's very time consuming. So this adds more time for people who are using the Braille typewriters to be able to complete the survey. Specify the number of possible responses per item. So this gives them an impression as to how many responses they need to consider before they answer. Offer alternative formats such as large print and Braille or audio versions. And make accessibility options clearly signposted from the onset. Now, the next group are people who are deaf or hard of hearing. Now, in the literature, there's an ongoing debate in terms of the notation that is used in some of the definitions. Now, hard of hearing refers to individuals who have mild or severe hearing loss. Now, in the literature, you do have instances where we'll come across instances where we have deaf written with lower D, and in some instances it's written with an uppercase D. There's debates in the literature about this notation. So the lower D case is used to describe a physical condition of profound hearing loss, whereas the instances where they use the uppercase D, it refers to those who identify with the deaf community and use sign language as their first language. In terms of prevalence, now for this particular group, communication is it exists in a continuum. Basically, you have people who are deaf and hard of hearing who solely use spoken language. rely on spoken language. And then others are fluent in sign language and with limited proficiency in national spoken or written language. In the UK, 2% of working age adults and 11% of people who are of state pension age report having some hearing loss. Issues that come up in terms of them trying to participate in the survey is that those who are less proficient in the written language or spoken language, particularly at risk of exclusion from research. And this is partly because some of the written language relies on standard language-based data collection methods. There's evidence to suggest that people who are hard of hearing or deaf have low average reading ability within this group. Now, partly this is because there is some different, so the written language it differs from sign language in terms of grammar and structure. So comprehension becomes a bit of a challenge for people to grasp the written questionnaires that are written in spoken language, are written in English language. Now, and questionnaires are rarely offered in sign language and are typically written in these formats that are a challenge for people who are deaf and hard of hearing. The ONS also conducted a qualitative study with this group. And some of the issues that they highlighted was considering invitation letters. These are often inaccessible to people who use British Sign Language due to reliance on written English. And participants suggested that offering information in both British Sign Language and also in English would be helpful. Plus also just having a logo on the letter, British Sign logo on the letter, they thought that would be helpful to them to signal that actually the materials can be adapted to their needs. Another method that has been used to prompt people to participate in social surveys is not to nudge reminders. Now, this receives mixed views between participants. Some of the receptive, if they were informed in advance that this will happen, that someone might come and knock on their door, while others raise safety concerns of receiving unannounced visits at their doors. And online completion was generally accessible as it is not, it doesn't rely on hearing. So online questionnaires were something that was helpful to people. However, people who use sign language still face challenges with written language and express a preference for British Sign Language translations alongside videos, so translation videos alongside the questions, so they can, if their preference is to is sign language, then a video that translates the text or the question was what they would find helpful. Those with low digital visuals, they found the online mode a barrier and expressed a preference for interview-administered dismount modes. Some of the literature or data collection methods that have been used or trialed in practice where video displays this study in the United States. It's an old study, though, 2010. They developed a touchscreen American Sign Language survey interface to deliver health risk questions in sign language. Another study in Poland they developed an avatar of a sign to sign Polish language for those whose Polish Sign Language was their first language. So these are innovative methods of trying to provide alternatives to just written language. The next group were people who have motor control impairments. Now, with motor control impairments, it affects people's ability to move, basically, and manipulate objects and interact with their physical environment. And this also includes functions like using keyboards or mouse and clicking. So this creates challenges for people with motor control impairments. These conditions include a wide range of conditions, including Parkinson's disease, multiple sclerosis. So people who then are not able to control their movements. In the UK, approximately 5% of working age adults and 15% of people of state pension age report experiencing motor control impairment. Now, the issues that are associated with these impairments is the difficulty with fundamental computer tasks like clicking, pointing, moving the mouse, typing. So it creates a challenge when they're engaging, for instance, with web participation. Main associated symptoms also include feeling fatigued, reduced motor speed, and diminished performance, which make they add additional hindrance to engaging in surveys. Although individuals with motor impairments often rely on digital tools for activities, inaccessible survey designs make it difficult for them to participate. It still creates a barrier for them participating with these surveys. Some measures that have been highlighted that might be of use would be accessible designs. In part, it's shifted towards desktop technology, so from desktop to mobile devices. This sort of reflects the changing patterns of device use. However, this technology is often cost inefficient due to customization needs. So many people, well, I would say many companies, when they're devising these devices, their focus is basically for mainstream. So they are not designed for subpopulations that have specific needs. In order for them to be then adapted to people with special needs, they need some specializing. And this can be very costly. Now, in terms of encouraging people participating, really, we need to be able to embed accessibility from the onset of our surveys to make it effective, rather than trying to then refit or adapt the surveys afterwards. So if we design our surveys with that in mind, that we want to include people who have difficulties engaging, that would be a more efficient way of doing it. However, it does cost. Now, how surveys need to do this would be to leverage the strengths of these different groups, so to avoid one-size-fits-all approaches and incorporate personalization to address these individual needs for people. The last group that I will talk about will be those with mental health problems and neurodevelopmental conditions. In the UK, the prevalence of people with mental health conditions, now, this is a broad spectrum of people in terms of the different types of mental health conditions that people present with. In the UK, about 12% of working age adults and 5% of people of state pension age report experiencing mental health issues. Now, mental health conditions, they range from common mental health conditions that include depression, anxiety, or obsessive compulsive disorder, which cause emotional distress, but typically they do not affect someone's insight or cognition. And then there's another spectrum of conditions that are more severe and specific disorders that involve altering people's thinking, mood, and behavior, as well as neurodevelopmental conditions like ADHD and autism. Now, the issues that come up when, in terms of related to survey, participation in survey, is that individuals with poor mental health or experience mental conditions, they face additional barriers to participation, partly due to their symptoms, in the sense that some people who are depressed may experience lack of interest in doing things, and as well as not having the cognitive capacity to participate and process questions. That makes it difficult for them to engage. Now, theory-wise, in terms of surveys, the survey response process, it involves 4 key stages: being able to comprehend the text that people are reading, and then before that, they need to then retrieve the information to be able to answer the question, and then they need to form a judgment in terms of the responses, and then the ability to then respond to that particular question. Now, mental health symptoms can affect any of those stages. And for instance, you might have reduced motivation to engage, or you might have difficulties with memory, so you're not able to recall the answers, and also this may lead to incomplete answers and lower data quality that's provided. The ONS also did look at this group in terms of how they might be supported to participate and what the challenges they expressed. One of the issues that they raised was in terms of postal invitations, they evoked some anxiety within some groups. For instance, people with obsessive compulsive disorder, they might have some fears in touching any mail that is coming from outside. So for them, receiving mail is not as simple as just receive the mail and opening. They go through a process to be able to open that letter. Now, repetition of information, I think in some instances, we do send reminders to people to repeat information and reinforce what the request for participating in the survey is, what the aim for the survey is. But for people with mental health problems, this also presents a challenge because the condition might impact their mental health in terms of memory. And then when we send these reminders, it provokes anxiety in them, in that they might have omitted something. It becomes a stressful situation because it's reinforcing some of their symptoms, that they are getting repeated information. So they then can't distinguish between whether is this new, is this old. It just invokes stress to them. Another means of reminding people is knock to nudge. And also this was viewed negatively by participants because it invokes anxiety when strangers come and knock at the door unexpectedly. A positive aspect, though, was being invited to participate in a survey. To some participants, they expressed that this fostered a sense of inclusion and gave them purpose, and they were willing to participate in the survey because they felt included. But also they're interested in the survey topics that were included, that would have been included in a survey. If it's something that's of interest to them, they were more willing to participate. Incentives as well also influenced participation decision. Views on online completion were mixed. This in part was because some people found it inaccessible in terms of the being online, but also some felt it was removed, it felt impersonal, while others valued this flexibility in that they could actually do the survey whenever they wanted. They didn't have to do it with someone else. It gave them a bit of autonomy to be able to participate when they wanted. And being able to complete the survey online actually was an achievement for some. some of the measures that from the literature that might be supportive to help people with mental health problems to participate would be access to easy to read materials. This would be include images to support the meaning of text. Although much of this material actually is designed from the perspective of people learning difficulties, disabilities, but it can be helpful in terms of supporting participants with understanding information who have challenges with reduced linguistic complexity. Another aspect was to use audio computer-assisted interviewing. Essentially, this enables people to listen to the question being read and responses through a headset, and then they can respond to that on screen. So there was an interface that allows them to respond on screen, which they found helpful. Now, another way of engaging them is through proxy responses, essentially for someone to respond to them on their behalf, because sometimes they might not be in a fit state to be able to participate, but someone who knows them well enough to participate or to answer on their behalf, that can be a way of obtaining responses for them. I will hand over to Christian for the next groups.
Thank you, Atlantla. So yeah, let's go to the next groups then. So individuals with literacy limitations are the next group. For this, we're using the definition by UNESCO, which is the ability to identify, understand, interpret, create, communicate, and compute using printed and written materials associated with various contexts. So basically, again, as we did with some of the other conditions, we're talking about a spectrum rather than a simple variable with two categories. Literacy involves a continuum of learning in enabling individuals to achieve goals, develop his or her knowledge and potential, and participate fully in community and wider society. So the OECD defines literacy across 6 levels, and they say that level 3 is required to understand relatively lengthy or complex texts. Surprisingly, about 80% of adults in England, according to the last survey of adult skills from the Program for the International Assessment of Adult Competencies, so PIAC, the 18% of adults in England, so around 6.6 million, had literacy levels at or below level 1. So this would be equal to poor literacy skills, which means that these subgroups can only understand short and simple sentences. And 6% of them were below level 1. So it's relatively high prevalence for this group in the UK. Issues for this group include, well, by construction, adults with low literacy skills are often underrepresented in social surveys, particularly in self-completion formats, and there's a lot of literature basically backing this up. There's a lot of evidence towards this area. Even when selected, these groups are more likely to decline participation, fail to return questionnaires, drop out of longitudinal studies. Again, this has been shown in several papers in the academic literature. And for those who take part, understanding survey questions can be difficult, increasing the risk of misinterpretation, lower data quality, satisficing behavior, that kind of thing is also associated with lower literacy or lower level of education qualifications even. It's obviously a more extreme problem for people with literacy limitations. And then there's also the other risk, the ethical risk, that some may feel pressure to participate without fully understanding the implications of the study, which could compromise the ethical principle of voluntary participation. So we also have to be mindful of this. Measures to include these groups in a more effective way again, we're making reference to what Fatla was mentioning about computer self-interviewing of video content to aid comprehension in self-administered web surveys. For this group, the inclusion of interviewer-led modes could help in mixed mode designs, such as face-to-face or telephone interviewing as part of mixed mode designs, alongside measures like supported or interviewer-assisted self-completion options. We know that the transformed labor force survey that the ONS is using this at least in some capacity, and we also know that this is also being considered as an option for the census 2031, according to the evidence we have. So this is good to include these kinds of groups that may find difficulties in responding to the surveys without this option. But in a more general way, the measures involve ensuring that all survey materials, including invitation letters, participant information sheets, the questionnaire itself, are assessed for reading age compliance. In the UK, the average reading age is 9 years old. So basically the measure would be to improve accessibility. Content should use plain English, simple vocabulary, short sentences, and avoiding abbreviations, colloquialisms, region-specific terms. In general, from the evidence we've seen in the survey practice, this is generally widely adopted across UK surveys, but it's very helpful to incorporate the people with issues, with literacy issues as part of survey research. For linguistic minorities, we have a very low, not very low, but we have a very high proportion of usual residents in England and Wales, aged 3 years and over, who can speak English or Welsh in Wales, according to the 2021 census. And 98% of usual residents in Scotland, aged 3 years and over, can speak English, according to the 2022 census. So we still have a fraction of the population who are not able to communicate in English or Welsh in Wales. So that in terms of the issues that these groups experience, that's similar to what we were seeing before. So individuals from cultural and linguistic minorities often find it difficult to participate in surveys if they do not speak or understand the language used in the materials. Even when contacted, they may be unable to fully understand the implications of their participation or provide informed consent without additional support, which is something similar to what we were discussing before. Those who do respond may be reluctant to share information on topics they perceive as sensitive due to cultural differences. So that's also something to be mindful of. And the issue of trust, which is described as a lack of trust outside their own ethnic group, community, or the people who speak their own language, has been highlighted in some qualitative research as a key barrier to participation. So there's also that to be mindful of. The main measure to include respondents who don't speak English in the case of UK survey research or the local language in a more general way is translations. They can improve participation amongst linguistic minorities, reducing non-response biases and improving sample representativeness. However, translating survey materials is complex, is often expensive. Translations must accurately reproduce the source text, use the natural forms of the target language, and express all aspects of meaning in a way that is easily understood by respondents, and this is not always easy to achieve. So the current best practice guidelines, the ones that we reviewed in the evidence review at least, advocate for these types of model, like the TRAPPED model, originally developed for the European Social Survey, which includes first stage in which 2 translations are produced, then a review process in which the 2 translators meet with survey and subject matter experts to reconcile the differences into a single review draft, then an adjudicator signing off the reviewed translation, a lot of pre-testing to assess comprehension, interview flow, potential data quality issues, and documentation of the entire processes. As part of our review, we saw a lot of surveys that do include some translations. However, we have both anecdotal evidence and some other empirical evidence as well, quantitative evidence. I mean that in general, the uptake for these translated versions is relatively low. We did find one of the surveys which reported 1.8%, the GP patient surveys in one of the instances reported that uptake for all the available materials combined, so not for just one single language. So this highlights the trade-off we were discussing before in terms of costly measures and how the uptake is and how effective they are in terms of increasing response rates and participation. And finally, briefly, because we're running out of time, the last group includes the digital divide. The digital divide is also not just a single concept. It involves several different types of digital exclusion. So usually the analysis is centered in digital access, which involves having an internet connection available, having the digital devices to access it, and the ease with which the devices can be accessed, and the autonomy and reliability of the internet connection. So that's a major dimension, which has been improving over time. However, across the population, I mean. However, there's other forms of digital exclusion, which include things like digital literacy, which involves the confidence and ability in using digital tools, and the awareness of ethics, safety, and acceptable use. And then we have digital assimilation, which is how to use digital technologies to enhance social connection and values in general. So how this is integrated into other dimensions of life. So as digital access in the UK continues to grow, in 2024, 94% of UK adults have home internet access and 95% owned a smartphone. However, an estimated 15% of UK adults lack the essential digital skills, so digital literacy or assimilation, to use online tools effectively. So that's another issue. So in terms of access, we know from the literature that offline and online populations differ not only in demographic characteristics such as age, sex, education, migration status, and household size, but also in substantive respects, topics including political attitudes, consumer behaviors, etc. So there's a lot of evidence about that. So we don't want to exclude the offline population from survey research. But however, even among individuals with internet access, those with limited digital literacy or assimilation may choose not to respond to online surveys. And this reluctance can stem from concerns about data privacy, the perception that using the internet offers them little benefit, or concern about their own ability to participate in the survey. So there's issues about that with digital skills as well. Measures that have been implemented in the literature include equipment provision. So we know that some surveys in the Netherlands, I think, have tried providing internet-enabled devices and connections to those who lack them. So this can help eliminate more effects because everyone responds to the survey via web. However, the approach is obviously costly, logistically challenging. What has been typically done is implementing mixed mode designs. So offering a non-web option, typically a self-administered paper questionnaire, can improve accessibility. And from an inclusivity perspective, it may make sense to make this option available upfront or clearly signposting it from the outset, because this could reduce the risk of exclusion. So basically people could see, oh, I have the option to complete via paper, so they will consider the survey potentially. And then there are several other measures to facilitate questionnaire access for those with maybe lower digital skills. So using QR codes to access the questionnaires as opposed to typing long URL links, including access links in SMS or email reminders where a named sampling framework is available, and ensuring that online surveys are compatible with multiple devices and print sizes, because there's a lot of variability in terms of digital literacy across devices as well. So basically, to close this presentation, I'm quoting here from the report by the Inclusive Data Task Force, which says that data producers should ensure that data collection instruments are accessible to all, recognizing differences in language literacy and the relative accessibility of different modes and formats. For example, using multi-mode surveys as standard practice and implementing additional adjustments to enable the participation of adults and children with a range of disabilities and those who experience other forms of exclusion, including digital exclusion. So we think there are different types of measures, as we have been seeing. There's a first type of measure that aims at improving access and participation for everyone, which we think these are measures that should be implemented in general terms, and this will improve participation across several of the groups that we have been seeing. So things like questionnaire access via short URLs, QR codes, easy login processes, testing the materials for accessibility, including letters and the questionnaire. So there's websites in which the accessibility of materials can be assessed. So that can be used to ensure that all materials are accessible to everyone. keeping the materials short and concise to as much as possible, of course, to reduce demands on participants, testing the content for reading age compliance. So the average UK reading age is 9 years old. Using as much as possible easy read or simple language with clear short sentences under 25 words. I'm mindful that some of the sentences in this presentation haven't complied with that, but that's another issue. Clearly state in accessible language why, how, and when personal data will be used, so that informed consent is something that can be used in the surveys, and collect data on all protected characteristics without making questions burdensome. So these, we think, are measures that can be generally implemented to increase participation and to improve access. There are other measures, such as mixed mode design, including interviewer-led modes, which can maximize participation by catering to different preferences and ensuring at least one option adapts to each respondent's requirements. However, again, we are talking about more expensive options here. And more specialized measures, including questionnaire translations, audio and video versions of questionnaires, or tailored apps, should be considered on a case-by-case basis, depending on the specific group that is being targeted. Taking into account, of course, the survey organization costs, also the broader cost for society of implementing these types of measures, but also legal requirements for inclusion, the time horizon, and the population heterogeneity. So there's various preferences in the population. So implementing one of these measures may not have the desired impact in case that there's many differences in terms of what people prefer to participate in a survey. And in terms of the further research that should be done after this evidence review is published, we think that qualitative research has identified diverse needs and adaptations required for different subgroups, but quantitative research remains limited. So this is something that we believe is very important. And we believe that further research is also needed to develop frameworks determining, for example, how to balance inclusivity with precision, because measures to include certain groups may require smaller sample size to offset costs. That could be an issue. The second point is whether priority should go to the largest excluded groups, those posing greater statistical bias risk, or groups protected under equality legislation. It's important because some of the measures we've seen to include some subgroups can effectively exclude others. So we have to make a balance here, and a balanced decision, and there's trade-offs to consider in all this. There's further research required on how to best engage with groups with lower literacy, given their high prevalence and exclusion risk. And there's also the whole world of implementing inclusivity practices effectively in longitudinal surveys, which we didn't cover, which we did cover to some extent in the evidence review, but there's maybe more work to be done around this area. And the evidence review and survey practice guides will soon be published on the Survey Futures website. So I think that's everything we had. I hope we have some time for questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Christian and Santa. Very interesting talks. Yes, we have 10 minutes for questions, and there is one. The first question is already in the chat box. What do people think of using AI to provide live translations of online surveys?
Thank you for the question. It's an interesting one. I think this is one of the issues in which AI could potentially be helpful. However, from the literature on translations, I think we still, at least at this stage, and this is just my personal opinion, I think we still need the human element in terms of ensuring that everything that is generated as a translation not only reflects what was meant by the original question in the original survey language, but also adapts well to how the target language is spoken, so that it sounds natural and that it also conveys the full meaning of the sentence. There are certain examples in the literature in which you see that the translated question looks, conveys the message from the original question, but sounds kind of weird and strange in the target language. So if AI can contribute in that, I don't think we should discard it, but I think there's still a human element to be considered in the translations as well. So I personally don't think it can be substituted, but maybe other people have other views on that.
I think there is Ruth put the comment in the chat box, and she's in agreement with what you just said, Christian. So I think everyone can see the comment there on the chat box. There is another question from Eileen. Eileen, would you like to ask the question yourself?
Yes, so I was just wondering were there any crossovers, between the groups in research that you've seen or come across? So, for example, are there people who may be visually impaired who also have mobility issues, or was your research sort of looking at each group or subgroup specifically, and were they distinct?
For the literature that we used for the ONS, actually, when they were selecting their samples, they were looking for people with those specific conditions. But you highlight a very important point in that people with disabilities, often they actually experience multiple levels of disability in some ways. And those are things that we need to think about. For instance, people with mental health problems actually might also have difficulties with literacy. So some of these things are actually combined in some ways. So it is an important point to highlight. It won't just be one particular issue. It's actually often a combination of issues.
Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments or suggestions? We still have 5 minutes. Yes, there is a question. Ruth, would you like to ask the question yourself? Okay, I'll read it out.
Hello.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Sorry, I was struggling to get my thing off mute. Yeah, I just wonder whether any standout groups where engagement was notably lower than other groups for what you would attribute to be accessibility reasons. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
I was trying to think of maybe Atlanta has an idea already.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I don't think there was any. The challenge, one of the issues about this is actually the measurement. And I think one of the things that we've highlighted is that when it comes to quantitative research, is quite limited. So it's difficult to really compare between the groups to see which one has more challenges than the other. And I think that's probably another area for research that's needed to really drill down into what groups need more specific help to be able to participate. But I don't think we've come across anything that would have compared between groups in a way that's comparable in terms of making the distinction whether some groups need more help than others. I don't think we've come across that.
And I was also thinking that in terms of the analysis, for example, of sample composition that we can do with the results of general social surveys, we usually tend to use some high quality population benchmarks, for example, from the census. And even in these cases, we don't really have the kind of the same question to be able to compare even the general levels of people who report having some sort of specific condition or disability. It's very difficult to make comparisons and to see how many people are being excluded from social research in general, because there's not kind of enough information for us to have a look at from that perspective.
Thank you.
Then
we have 2 more questions. First question, is there anything on incorporating AAC into surveys, e.g. Makaton or participants using assistive device to respond to surveys?
I think we are reporting in the section about disabilities specifically. We are sort of reporting kind of assisted inflation with devices. So yeah, we do have that in the evidence review, right?
Yes, there are some that use assistive device. This study in Poland, actually, that was translating Polish language into Polish Sign Language was actually using an avatar to try and recreate, instead of using a human translator, trying to create an avatar. So it's like a depiction, an electronic depiction of a human translating that in Polish language. So there is that capacity, but I've not come across anything like a Marketon. But yeah, I imagine there's those technology advances that are happening that to be done.
Okay, and now we have the last question. Edis, would you like to come in and ask it yourself? Because I'm not quite sure.
Yes, I can. Well, you offered translations as one of the measures you can use for people with language problems. So I'm curious, is that also experience with interviewers going to trying to interview in different languages, and how do they do that? And is there anything literature on that?
What I can say from the literature that I reviewed, and thank you for your question, by the way, is that in general, I think the general recommendation is to translate to go for a professional translation of the questionnaire and to have the questions previously translated, even when interviewers are present to do the survey in a face-to-face capacity, because of these possible discrepancies between the meaning of the questions between the original and the target language. So in general, what has been done in the literature is basically do office-based translations, then have the full questionnaire. And even when interviewers go in person to do the interview, they kind of operate with that translated questionnaire already. So I haven't seen evidence of the other alternative that you are suggesting in the literature.
So then the interviewers are not taking questions in another language, or
they have I suppose what I've seen is that what you have in the face-to-face interaction, you could provide clarification or ask follow-up questions for certain questions that might be difficult for interviewers, but they base themselves in an already translated questionnaire that has been translated in the office, is what I've found in the literature.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I would like to say massive thank you to 3 presenters today. I thought they were fantastic presentations, very interesting, and many thanks to the audience for the questions, for the comments, and for the discussion. I think it was a very interesting event, and I really hope we will see you all at our future events of Survey Futures. Please join our mailing list, and you will be aware of what is happening between now and the end of our project. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.